Welcome to Geek Out Weekly, the podcast where we geek out not so strongly. I'm your host, Aadil, and today I am joined, as always, by Ben.
Hello.
It's just the two of us. We can make it if we try this week. Yeah, we're doing something a little different this week. Playing with the format, trying to, we're a pretty young podcast, trying to feel out things. And so this time, I've rewatched a thing. And Ben's not, and I'm going to try and sell him on it. But really, it's just a chance for me to geek out about something from my childhood.
Yep.
And that something is also kind of cheated into play because I can't do things normally. It's the book, The Phantom Tollbooth, which is one of my childhood favorites and was really formative for me, especially in hindsight, which we'll get to in a sec. But we're actually talking about the 1970 film adaptation of the book, which was a Mel Blanc, of Looney Tunes fame, movie adaptation. Sorry, the cat has decided to play, and that was distracting. But yeah, so a couple things. We've had some feedback, and I thought it'd be worth just chatting about because, we're talking about the structure and trying new things. And
cool.
One of the things was, maybe the recaps, like our WandaVision wrap-up episode, kind of seemed to hit its stride at the after the hour mark, just because we spent a little too much time going through the bits and bobs of the episodes at the expense of maybe just general chat, and the general chat was enjoyed. Although that, as we pointed out, that might have just been people don't like Ben.
Yeah, I did disappear after an hour, didn't I? But
yeah. But I get it because I think I listen to sort of movie podcasts a bunch, but they tend to be longer, and so going through the detailed beats, get the structure, and so we're going to try different things going forward, and please keep sending in that feedback and let us know what you think. And the other thing was just people want more Dave, which I agree.
That's cool. Yeah, I agree as well. We've currently got some scheduling issues where he's better to record on a Thursday. I can't record on a Thursday.
Yeah.
And it might be that we try and find a way that we, swap every few weeks or something like that. That are dependent on workloads and things that I can rotate in and out, and we can swap sort of recording days and stuff like that to see and get a wider range of views on kind of all the stuff we're talking about.
So let us know also, for those of you who do tune in live, whether it's a lot easier to play with when we if people are flexible or happy to. Sorry, the cat's going mildly insane. He's just I got rid of my desk, but it's still in my room. I don't use it. And it's because the drawer is broken, and I had duct taped the bottom shut so that it wouldn't drop things out the back. But the tape broke, and this time I was just like, no, fuck it. I got this shelf. I'm just gonna get rid of it. Now the cat, after a week of it being there, has decided the hanging tape is a toy. Cats. Anyway,
you gotta love them.
The reason why I picked Phantom Tollbooth, he says, getting us back on track in the cleanest segue, fresh from the factory segue, is because Norton Juster, the author, passed away last week, and I was very sad, and it just made me think about the book and the movie. And we do tend to do more film movie stuff, so I thought, maybe we could talk or watch the adaptation, which is sort of an interesting thing in and of itself. But anyway, so basically, it's a children's book about a boy who's bored with life and malaise and hates school, doesn't really like hanging out at home, and a box appears, a wrapped present, giant box appears in his room, and he unwraps it and builds a toll booth out of the pieces, and then it gets transported to a magical land, and he learns life lessons and saves the princesses. Okay. Very standard sort of thing, kind of never-ending story type sort of style of similar beats, except he goes right away. But why it's great is there's so much in the world he goes to. It's all puns and wordplay, and the basic conceit is it was the Kingdom of Wisdom, and when the old king died, his two sons Azaz, the sorry, I'm gonna have to let the cat out. He's just yelling. I'm sure you can hear him.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Dorian needs to get out. He's done. Doesn't want to listen to our chat this afternoon, which is fair. Seems fine for a cat not to want to do that.
Oh, he's talking shit about me. I know it. Right. So Azaz is basically the prince who's he runs half the kingdom, and it's a kingdom of words.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's his brother, the math magician.
Nice.
Kingdom of numbers. So it's Dictionopolis and Digitopolis.
Okay.
Right. And they basically Azaz is like words are better than numbers. Numbers are better than words, and the math magician, and they fight. And we, and so they have their daughters, the princesses of Sweet Rhyme and sorry, let me get this right. Princess of Sweet Rhyme and Pure Reason. And they say that numbers and words are as good as each other, and that makes the new kings cross, and they banish them to the castle in the air.
Both to the same castle?
Yes.
Right.
Princesses go in castle in the air.
Mm-hmm. That seems like a terrible plan by the king, because they're like, well, my daughter's saying that that everything is equal, so I'm just going to send you somewhere else, and I'm going to send you over to the same place, because obviously neither of you would talk to each other and be able to build upon this in any way whatsoever.
So they're trapped in the castle. It's fine. So like, I mean, it's a very much a children's book, and so Milo, finds out about this, and he gets his task becomes saving them from the prince, from the thing. But again, it's sort of so light in that respect. So much about it is the writing and the words, and the playing with notions. That is, I think, why I think the book is fantastic is because, like, for example, he meets one of the first characters he meets is Talk, the watchdog.
Okay, Talk.
Who is in the picture there.
Yep.
And he has a clock on the side of him because there's a watchdog, and it ticks. But he also ends up saving Milo from the doldrums because he gets trapped in the doldrums because he wasn't paying attention. And because not only does he watch over time, he also watches over boys. So he's saving Milo, the character. So it's like a lot of that stuff, and a lot of it is wordplay, and also like aphorisms being played with. Time flies is actually a key component in the book that helps them get away from peril at one point because he's a watchdog. Time flies. We can fly down the mountain, right?
Yeah.
And so, why I think the book is excellent is because reading it's not hard to read, and it has all these wordplays and stuff. So as you're a child reading it, you have to work out what's going on rather than like on a movie. It tends to be more visual stuff, and it's less learning, I guess, because you're not actively going through and reading the word spelling bee and then reading about a giant wasp-like thing, right? Like, it's also because it's a book, it's more in depth in the descriptions than. And so much of it, again, is this like interplay between like the math magician, right? Like even the math side is still wordplay. And so you lose a lot of the richness of the work. But again, I like them both. Also, the movie itself is Mel Blanc. So it's like Looney Tunes, but without any of the characters, but still really bright and showy and like words appearing and a lot of hijinks, and it's just done so well. And Mel Blanc voiced most of the original Looney Tunes. So like the cop he first meets, he gets ticketed, Officer Short Shrift. Sounds exactly like Yosemite Sam except without the twang, and it's distracting. So Milo goes, basically it opens with a live action Milo at school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I realize I'm jumping around, but it doesn't. We're not doing things structurally. That's what we're trying. So yeah, so Milo is this boy. He's around 8 to 10, maybe 10.
Hmm.
Um, and he's sitting in school and he's kind of staring off in space, and the soundscape is just a bunch of talking,
Mm.
like, and it's all like school sentences, like some math phrases, some like facts from history, etc., in all different voices. And again, you get like, oh, that's Mel Blanc right there. I
Mm.
know, which is really weird when he's saying something mathy because you're like, um, and he just looks glum and bored. And then he like leaves school and plods home. And there's this song, "What should we do with Milo?" And it's all kind of slow, and like the lyrics are just kind of like, here's this boy doing nothing. And then he gets home and he gets on the phone and he chats with his friend Ralph, and they just talk about how boring life is.
Mm.
Um, life is boring. School is boring. I just want to get home, but when I'm home, I just want to go back to school. Uh,
Mm.
and like that seems actually really well done. Remembering being a child talking on a phone that was attached to the wall, and like the different
Yes.
positions you would do. At one point,
Hmm.
Milo's got a cushion on his head because he's just bored and doing things, and it feels so like childy. It's
Yeah.
great.
Nice.
And then the thing appears, and he builds the thing, and a gramophone is on top of the toll booth.
Right.
So he builds a toll booth, and it comes with a car, and it like tells him all the rules, and like a car appears, and then a map appears in the car, and he picks it up, and then the rules of the road appear, and some street signs, and then he's like, I don't know if I want to do this, and it's like, mate, and the thing's like, you got to make up your mind, and he drives through, and you see like a flat shot, and he drives through the toll booth, and as the car goes through the toll booth, it becomes a cartoon,
Hmm.
and he looks and he sees that he himself is a cartoon,
Right.
and then he backs out and he's a guy. And then
Oh,
there's this like
nice.
small,
Okay.
yeah, and there's this small montage, which is very much the film part versus the book, obviously, right?
Hmm.
Of him like throwing an arm and a leg out and like poking his head out either side, trying to figure out how like this barrier just makes me a cartoon on this side, but like my foot can be live, my head can be a cartoon, and vice versa. And it's just really charming and sets the tone for this will be silly.
Hmm.
Um, and then yeah, he gets in the car. It said, the toll booth tells him he has to make up his mind. He's like, well, I don't have anything better to do. So he drives through, and then we get like a Looney Tunes spiral like tunnel, and then
Mm.
he shows up. Oh, sorry. The other thing that's clear is he has to have a destination. It's one of the rules in the
Okay.
rule book. It's like, where you want to go, and he's like, I don't know. He's like, and it's one of the rules. You have to have a destination if you're going to go anywhere. Um, and so he goes. So he just looks at the map, and top of the map is the castle in the air. So he says, "Castle in the air, I guess." They're like, cool, go. And then he crosses over, and he goes through all the hijinks, which we don't need to go beat by beat,
Hmm.
right? But he's just like, you know, first thing he does is get ticketed by the officer, and you get a sense for things because it's this like cop with a wheel as a like wheels as feet. So he's both car and cop.
Yeah.
Officer Short Shrift comes and he just says guilty, 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 and then he makes up charges for Milo. Yeah,
Ooh.
oddly topical to be guilty of.
Right.
Uh, like over structuring traffic. So he was accused of speeding. Then he said he wasn't. He's like, you were speeding. He's like, I wasn't even moving. He's like, you were over structuring traffic. Um, and then he goes. The officer's like, all right, do you want a long sentence or a short sentence? And Milo's like, a short sentence? And then the officer writes on a pad of paper, I am. Here, it's the shortest sentence I know.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And then you're like, okay, this is what I mean about like reading it versus seeing it does a
Mm.
different thing. But
Hmm.
it's, I mean, you saw it written, it's really good. And then he goes, okay, now you have to report to Dictionopolis to serve your 6 million year sentence. Oh no, that's a different thing. You just have to serve your sentence. The 6 million years comes later. But and then so he drives off, and he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And he's Milo, he's bored. So
Mm.
he sort of, it's just a straight road. And so he just stops paying attention, and he's leaned back, and he's driving, and then there's a fork in the road, and it's like to Dictionopolis, and then the doldrums. And he drives, and the road slowly starts getting melty, and he gets
Mm.
stuck. And then these things come out, and they're like, I can't remember what they're called, but they're like half translucent and melty, and they're all like, "Mo, where are the doldrums?" And then he's like, he talks about laughing, and they're like, "You can't laugh in the doldrums because you just got to be sad and bored, and you can't have ideas." And Milo's like, "I don't know what to do," and that's when Talk comes to rescue him by like yelling and barking at them, and then Talk's just like, you're stuck. The only way out of the doldrums is to use your mind, to think, use your imagination. And so he thinks it's like, think of fish that fly and birds that swim, and then he just like starts throwing ideas, and then Milo starts saying like simple things and weird things, and just like engages his imagination, and that lets him leave. And that's sort of a really good. Um, that's basically what the point of the book is.
Yes.
Is like, and the movie. It's like, um, don't get trapped in a cycle, but also like the world is there, be present, kind of.
Yeah. I was going to say it sounds like both the book and the film are trying to make that point. Absolutely, that you need to sort of engage a little bit more, and not just to sort of float along and that sort of thing. And it sounds from what you're saying that it's quite successful in that message, and putting that across in very kind of clever ways as well, and using that wordplay and just the way the English language can be structured and things to tell all of this. But do you or did you read the book first or see the movie first? What
book,
came
100%.
first? Book. Okay.
Book 100%. And I was like recommended by one of my teachers in elementary school, and I loved it. And I used to always have a copy with me. And it was one of the first books I gave to, well, it's one of the first books I gave to my niece rather than giving to my sister to read.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. I actually also was one of the first books I gave an ex-girlfriend, because you talk about your youth, etc.
Yeah.
Just like, this thing makes me, because and now that I think about it, I'm a philosopher and logician, and I like moved through the more formal stuff once I learned it, to sort of thinking about the nature of the formal stuff. My PhD was on the nature of logic. My master's was, I made a logic to model promising.
Yep.
Like, I've very much always been in the middle of rhyme and reason, and the importance of both is just, that's just who I am. Also, all the bad jokes and the punning. Like, when I think of, if you like, this book is me, and sort of like, it is formative me in a lot of ways. That and like Hitchhiker's Guide with irreverence and different types of wordplay. But that's why I geek out about it, because I realize, like, even from a younger age than I had realized, these things appealed to me. But also, I think I did kind of learn the lesson. It's actually probably a good moment to just, I meant to send you this before, but Norton Juster, the gentleman who wrote this and passed away last week at 91, was an architect.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Lived in New York. And he got a grant to write a children's book about cities, because he was arguing that basically he had an idea for a book. And he got a grant, and he was guilty about not progressing with it, and ended up writing a bunch of pieces about a kid named Milo, who so yeah, he basically, apparently was inspired by a boy who approached him on the street, and they talked about the nature of infinity, and he wanted to write a story about a boy who asked too many questions. But what ended up happening is it kind of inverted, and that boy is kind of Milo at the end of the film.
Right.
And so what I find really cool is the idea is basically Milo. No one's explained why learning is why school is important, and like the beauty of learning to Milo. That's why he kind of just goes through the motions. And Norton Juster wanted to write a book that sort of spoke to the importance of learning and loving learning. And so things like memorization and rote learning are kind of simple flat characters do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, while yeah, so and overly wordy for the wordy's sake is like multiple times like lambasted in the
Right.
book. It's very much about understanding, learning, and the why behind it. So, for example, the humbug um, says a slavish concern for the composition of words is the sign of a bankrupt intellect. Um, and it's such a wonderfully crafted sentence because it is itself,
Yes.
right? It's someone trying to sound important while saying a thing that slams them in their ability, like their attempt to sound important. And the humbug is this sort of pretentious type character, and
Mm-hmm.
he's got like, yeah, it's but yeah. So the idea is education is really important, and you shouldn't, if you're bored with learning, then either the teaching is wrong or no one's bothered to explain to you why learning is great.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a combination. And then the other thing is basically um sometimes some rules are dumb,
Right.
right? Because you have this tension between Dictionopolis and Digitopolis where it's like in Dictionopolis you can't ever mention a number. So for example, Milo and the humbug and the spelling bee have a disagreement, and Milo gets, and like the market stall of letters, because letters are things you can eat, etc. Yes, right. The market stall of letters and buying and selling, etc., is just kind of ruined, and the officer comes in, and yeah, and so Milo gets charged with it, and then again he's like, "You can't charge you can't judge me. Like only a judge can like sentence me." Because he said 6 million years in prison. He's like, no, and so the officer turns into Judge Short Shrift, and he's like, well, you can't take me to jail. It's only a jailer. Switches to Jailer Short Shrift because he's also that. But he gets sentenced, and then the king had already invited him to dinner. The king invites him over. He's like, well, I can't help you because I have to serve my 6 million year sentence. And it's like 6 million years. That's a number. You can't do that. So the sentence is destroyed because it has a number in it.
Perfect.
Right, and it's such a good way of showing how stupid and arbitrary and like close-minded the Azaz is being. So yeah, so it's a lot of it's like these very complex themes done in very silly obvious ways, and such a good yeah, such a solid thing. And so, and he like meets all kinds of people, like the weatherman. That's the weather man who can
Yep.
tell you whether something will be or not, and and he has the balloons that are questions of all the five W's and H, and like it's basically, he's like the weatherman. I'm much more important. It's much more important to know whether the weather will change than the weather. And then you find in prison there's the witch, which is the weatherman's sister. Again, classic. So yeah, so the whole premise is like he then convinces Azaz that things would be better with rhyme and reason because his kingdom kind of doesn't work because, of course, it doesn't have numbers. And when he first meets Azaz, oh, this is the other thing. It's a musical, the movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. And so Azaz sings this song, which is basically like you can't, like, you can't have one fine day without the day. You can't, he says all these like turns of phrases and like it says, like the evidence that words are better than numbers is like you need the word to make the sentence to make sense. And then when we meet the mathematician, there's the song is sung again, but it's inverted, so you can't have one defined day without the one, right? And it's like it's, and I can't remember in the book how they do it, but the songs are the extant new stuff. And I think that makes it more accessible to younger kids.
Yeah.
Because obviously, like 8 is quite, it's like I think 8 plus book to read, like, or read together. And I think the important thing, and I say that because it's the act of being the one doing the reading versus being read to is so important because of like the wordplay. Because I think you would still enjoy it when you were younger. You could follow it, but some of that richness would be lost because so much of it is like in the act of doing. But watching it, you get the jokes and the songs and the visuals a lot easier.
Yep.
And there's things like the awful din, which the Doctor Dissonance, who's like almost like the Wizard of Oz in his cart at the beginning of that, like that type of snake oil salesman, and just sells bad noises because he thinks the world should be full of them. And then Milo's like, I've never. He's like, have you? Here's my assistant, the awful din. He's like, oh, I've never met an awful din. And then he goes into this. Are you sure? Because like, when you're making a racket when your mom's on the phone, what does she say? Stop that awful din. And that gives all these examples. You're, in traffic. Oh, that awful din. He's like, so you've met him before. Yeah. So it's just like a whole bunch of side characters that they meet along the way that give small lessons. And sometimes some of them are really small. Sometimes it's just fun wordplay. And so they go to Dictionopolis and they go to Digitopolis. Oh, so he convinces. So he gets a bag full of all the words that form ideas and answers, and then when he leaves Digitopolis, he gets a pencil that can do all the maths.
Mm-hmm.
These are the tools he will use. But the other thing is, again, this shows just like he's so he convinces the math magician, okay, things would be better with Rhyme and Reason back, who are banished in the Castle of the Air. And he says, yes, but wait, does my brother agree with you that they should be back? Because if he agrees with you, I'm never going to agree to it.
Mm-hmm.
And Milo's like, yes, but what if I convinced you that you agreed on something? And then he does a little proof. He goes, okay, so we agree that if your brother agrees with something, you'll disagree, and you'll agree, and if you agree with something, he'll disagree. But that means you both agree to disagree, so you agree on something. And he has this little proof, and it's what I like. I really love it because I didn't realize at the time, but of course, like so much of like real math, like when you're not just doing mathematics, when you're like doing pure mathematics or on the edge, you're doing proofs, and they're often wordy, right? Like
yes.
you're not dealing with just 1 + 1 = 2. And I was like, they literally put a mathematical proof structure in the thing, even though he's the math magician, and like most of the puns and stuff are based on numbers because they're more tangible, because kids don't quite get what math is,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
In the abstract. But they put an abstract mathematical proof in, and it makes sense, and you get it because it's just the underlying logic of the situation, right? And you get it, and it's silly, and it works, and you're like, well, that, like, real people would be like, no, I'm not buying your shit. Like, you're just fucking around. But as the math magician's like, logic is sound, got to do it. I guess I'll give you this pencil. Go rescue the princesses. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, I don't want to. Oh, I guess just the other big thing is to get to the castle, that you have to go through the mountains of ignorance, and they're full of demons.
Okay.
But these demons are like, my favorite is the terrible Trivium, who asked them for help. And he said, aha, okay, Milo, I want you to here's a mound of sand and some tweezers. Can you move the sand from here to here? And then he goes to the humbug. He says, here's a needle. Can you dig a hole through this rock wall so we can get through? I can't remember what he does with the watchdog, but the whole point is like, some tasks are dumb, right? And like they're trivial and they shouldn't be done, right? But instead, it's a demon they have to fight, and like Talk is like has the wherewithal to be like, no, this is bad. You're the terrible Trivium. And then like they meet the Senses Taker. That's Senses Taker. And he's like gets their names, and he's like, and they're like, oh, we got to get away. He's like, I'm gonna take away your sense of direction and your sense of duty, so you won't leave. And the way they fought that is Talk remembers that they got a bag of laughter from the dissonance guy with the awful din, and so they opened the bag of laughter, and they all started laughing, and he couldn't take their sense of humor, so the Senses Taker failed. Like things like that. But like, so in the middle of like just silly punny wordplay, the Sense Taker doesn't make sense. It's like things like the terrible Trivium, which is making a point, right? That like some tasks trivial and they don't matter, and if it's both, you shouldn't do them.
Yep.
Right? Which for a pro school thing is like, oh god, I've just realized I think I took that lesson too much to heart, because every report card for like from the 5th grade to the 12th had zeros on it because it was some shitty assignment. I'm like, this is dumb. I'm not doing it
Yeah.
because I was that kid, and my mom that drove my mom batty. I have not actually put together that the terrible trivium is definitely that feeling
Hmm.
of it's not just it's trivial, but it's like, well, why are we doing this?
Hmm.
Why not?
I love how with the kind of, you've already picked out some of the points where you feel that this is sort of rubbed off on you, but actually talking through it, you're like, oh, I hadn't quite made that kind of connection between these sorts of things, and you can see even more so how this has kind of influenced you, or at least rubbed off in some sort of way, in sort of, during your formative years, and establishing kind of the person that you are. And I think that's one of the excellent things about not children's books, but books for younger people, or even movies for young people, to help them to explore and establish things that they enjoy, or the way that they will be looking at the world and stuff. And it's really important to have a broad range of these things, and not just to sort of go, hey, my parents like, I don't know, Marvel or Star Wars or this, and this is what I'm going to, trying to have a huge range of different sort of genres and writers and things like this. And this isn't something like I've never heard of this before, nor the author. So from your explanation, it's definitely something that I mean, already you've sort of sold it to me in kind of like 40 minutes that I'm definitely going to go and watch this. And I'll, as you say, if the film is maybe a little bit more accessible to a younger audience, it might be something that maybe not this year, but when Evelyn's more sort of 5 or 6 or something like that, because with her being in reception and in school, she's super interested in this kind of thing, how numbers work, how language works. She'll repeat stuff back to us and say, that doesn't make any sense, surely you say it like this. And she's all about that kind of thing at the moment. So it seems like within this kind of next year that it would be a good thing to introduce her to. The question I kind of have to bring us back to the book and the film is, are there many differences between the two? Is there sort of big chunks of the book that are missed in the film, or do you feel that even if there is, that it's successful in hitting all those beats? Could you recommend the movie without sort of then saying, but you should read the book?
I mean, I think like I said, the big thing is that you just don't. Oh, okay. I also did the thing where I kept saying Mel Blanc when I needed to say Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones is the main animator guy behind Looney Tunes. Mel Blanc is just a huge
the voice.
Voice actor. Yeah. So Chuck Jones is the musical film director.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, I just got that wrong, but I realized. Okay. So there are different beasts because of their mediums. And like I said, I think for why it was formative for me and why I got so much out of it, and I've reread it a bunch of times, including being an adult, is like I said, the act of reading. But like I said, if you're younger, or your child is younger or whatever, there's still stuff to get out of it. And also, I think making it a musical and sort of giving it this other edge to make up for sort of the dulling of, not being able to go through the words and seeing those connections and making them is really smart. Also, some of the ways that I think they, like, I can't remember if the weatherman actually had yeah, he did have weather balloons. That's right. That's what that is. Sorry, I was trying to remember how much of the visual gags like translated. But some of it isn't quite the same. And in fact, I think the way the climax is done is shortened.
Right.
And like, so there's definitely some bits that are different. Because I think so the time flies thing is a thing in the book that's not in the movie, I don't think. Milo just, I think, for time constraints, etc., Milo just sort of goes and though he uses the weather balloons to get down the mountain. Because once you go up the stairs to the castle in the air, the stairway disappears. But Talk was knocked out at the time in the movie, but I don't think it was in the book. I haven't read the book in a while because I had my copy is in Canada. It was one of the things I was going to pick up last Easter when I visited. But yeah, so there's some differences in, like, I know my vague recollection is the signs that came with the car were used somewhere and they just weren't in the movie,
Hmm.
which is odd because they were introduced, but I think that was just part of the, like, this is the detail. I really like it. I think uh it's yeah, it's simpler, which makes it flatter. But in some ways it's really uh cool because, like, there's a guy who conducts the sunset and sunrise and rainbows,
Mm.
um, which is an interesting premise to read about. But seeing that happen, but also basically the guy's like, I need to take a nap. I need to sleep. Wake me up before sun so I can do the sunrise. And then the humbug whispers, and because humbug is kind of like the bad voice on the shoulder. It's like talking the humbug for
Hmm.
Milo. Um, and he's just like, you could just, like, we need to get going. You could just direct the sunrise, and you won't even have to, like, wake him up. And then Milo tries, and he fucks everything up because he
Okay.
doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just realized that it's a family. Damn it! I was yeah. I don't because this is
Language.
an episode that, if you were interested in, but it's, I mean, whatever. So he messes everything up, and like, the moon comes out at the same time as the sun, and the stars are out, and, like, everything's going wrong because he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know how to do the thing, and they kind of just run away from it
Mm.
uh, in the movie. And I think in the book maybe he gets scolded. I can't remember.
Hmm.
Um, but obviously, as a film, and with really cool, imaginative, talented animators behind it, seeing the cacophony of what sunrises, sunsets, and celestial bodies at the same time would look like, especially in that Chuck Jonesy style, is
Mm.
really cool. And that's the thing you get out of the movie you can't get out of the book in the same way, because the descriptions of the visual kind of don't work as well, right?
Hmm.
It's just a sort of give and take.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
I
yeah,
guess it's.
mostly I think. Go on.
I was going to say it's difficult then to kind of remove the two from each other. So I always prefer to read a book before I see a movie, just because of that visual impact it will have on my own imagination when
Yeah.
reading a book. So it might be I say that I'd introduce Evelyn to this, in a year or so or something. But then maybe I'd try and introduce the book to her several years later, when her
I
recollection
worn
of the
off.
movie might be, not even there, if she watches it when she's sort of 5 and then reads the book when she's 10, depending on how much she sort of takes in. But to try and separate that, at least to allow your kind of imagination its own freedom to express and understand what's kind of going on. I think it's really important with books that you don't get stuck with someone else's interpretation
I'm
of visuals, that because your imagination in your brain is a wonderful thing and can come up with so many different interpretations for things and put its own sort of stamp on stuff. So yeah, interesting kind of a further and bigger question really about people's interpretation of different things and how we should all have our own kind of
Yeah. I mean,
stamp on
so what I
stuff.
will say is the thing about the book is, so Juster lived shared his house with Jules Pfeiffer, who is a cartoonist,
Okay.
and found out he was writing a story about a boy, and they ended up illustrating the Phantom Tollbooth.
Right.
And so I think that helps bridge that gap. But, like,
Hmm.
for me, I still remember those pictures and that style, just because I read the book first, maybe. But, like, even like, it's sort of one of those things where, as a, like, illustrator, so like pens, like outlines, no color, no
Hmm.
cartoon illustration. Um, that's what Milo looks like to me. So it's kind of doing that thing that you're saying. Oh, it'd be good. The book has its own visual tone, which
Yep.
helps
Okay.
bridge the gap between the two, and it's very different from the Chuck Jones movie.
Mm.
So I think in that way it kind of is fine. But I think, but I can't imagine the book without, mostly because it's a chapter book with illustrations. So there's
Yeah.
it's again at that age group. Uh, but now that I think about it, like, I wonder if I read the book, how much, because it just, I rewatched the movie this past day for this episode, how much of it I would be adding, like especially things that aren't drawn.
Mm, mm.
So yeah, I mean, it is an interesting thing about adaptations, etc. Right? Like tons of people say this about Harry Potter, right? Like if
Yes.
you read
Yeah.
the books before the movies came out, did you? And then it's since has that affected your sort of mental conception of Harry Potter? Is it now stuck forever as Daniel Radcliffe, even though you had slightly different
Hmm.
thing? Um, yeah. But I think I mean, especially because the illustrations, which are not a lot, but they're really good. I think it'd be fine to push back against that. Well, now you just have the moving picture in your head.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So
Cool.
one thing I will say about the end of the movie,
Hmm.
just because I think it encapsulates kind of what the it's like the thesis statement, because Milo gets to the castle and he meets Rhyme and Reason. They're like, "Hey, welcome, Milo." And he's like, how do you know my name?" He's like, "Oh, we sent for you." They're like, "What?" He's like, "What are you talking about? I was just sitting around and a tollbooth showed up." They're like, "Oh, well, we were stuck here, and what we needed was a child so bored they would do anything and go anywhere to save us." And then Milo goes, and then they go, "But also someone with the courage, curiosity, and kindness to get to do the job, and
Yep.
that's why we sent for you." And then he goes, "But I screwed everything. But I'm not good. Like I screwed everything up. I ruined the sunset. I got trapped in the doldrums, all these things." And they go, like, "Right, but like you learn from your mistakes." And I can't remember that. It's like often we learn more from the mistakes we make, uh, basically the things we try and fail at than the things we fail to try at. Something like some wordplay like that. Some inverted wordplay. I'm
Mm.
getting it a little mixed up, but and again, like that's the sort of the secondary thesis of the thing is like go live. Learning isn't about being right. It's not about following a rule. It's about like the act of learning itself. And that gives them the like push to figure out how to get them out of the castle, which is talking to the weatherman, etc. I think there's a how and a here balloon, and then they go and pick up Talk and the Humbug on the way, and they rescue and another song plays, and it's basically kind of the end, except he drives off into the sunset, and then Ralph is still on the phone with him, waiting, asking where he's been for the past. In the book, it's an hour, and in the film, it's 5 minutes.
Right. Okay.
And then the film ends with Ralph being like, "Wait, hold on a second, something's appeared in my room." Uh,
Nice.
and so Milo hangs up the phone,
Yeah.
which is a very crisp ending. But yeah, it's such a nice idea of like a roaming toll booth solving the like doldrums and teaching kids to learn to love learning.
Mm, mm. But also, it's a nice message that this isn't. It's kind of a one-off story, as you say. That there's this roaming toll booth that you can be that kid. That if you are bored, there is always something that can pull you out of it. Whether it's an adventure that you go on with your friends, whether it's a story, so many different things. That's a really nice sort of message to finish on. Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously I've skipped a bunch.
Mm-hmm. I
There's a
can
nice
watch it. I can
little
watch it for myself now.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But yeah, so this is why it's really sweet, and I think the messages it's very I think it's hard to do this. It's very hard to make something with an obvious message on its sleeve that doesn't seem like it's preaching.
Mm.
It's not, or like mechanically forcing on you, and it's clearly a labor of love where it's like so many parts of it are just pushing that general theme forward, but it's still entertaining and fun, and there's dumb jokes, and there's like I think the way they beat some of the demons is like using the bag of ideas and combining words and numbers, and
Mm.
in the movie, there's one point where um, he pulls forthright out and draws a giant four and uses the four as a bow, and the long word forthright as an arrow. And I think if I recall correctly, there are clever bits there when they're fighting the demons in the Mountain of Ignorance, um, but also visually, it's just easier to use them as physical items, etc.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Just yeah, and the songs are fun. It makes it more of a, I think the musical aspect of the movie makes it a lot, like it scales the age down a bit,
Mm-hmm.
because some of the stuff gets simpler because it's a movie and a musical and they're like singing songs, and if you don't get each lyric of the song, you still get the gist that words are wonderful things, and if you
Yes.
don't recognize an aphorism, it's fine because the next one's coming along, and all you have to do is see that what he's saying is a bunch of sentences with numbers and words in them, and he's saying the words are important, and then you see later sentences, and if you don't clock that it's the same sentences, that's fine. You see that he's saying the numbers are important,
Yeah.
and you realize that, and it's just as obvious in the movie and the book that this is silly.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sentence doesn't work without either part.
It's interesting to see maybe where this would have influenced sort of other things, because as you're saying this, there's lots of more modern Disney films, and I've got like Frozen in my head because my daughter loves watching. She loves these kinds of Disney films, similar kinds of things. But the way that even in their songs they use a lot of that kind of language as well. So that I think in one of the I can't remember which the song is, but they one of the characters says, "All my life has been a series of doors in my face," and it kind of, they can visually show those kinds of things without it being that, and she's sort of taking you through this sort of area and sort of element of her life, and it kind of links up all of the different sentences with different things and stuff. So it's interesting to see how we've got this kind of not modern version of this, but how it is still being, it's not language that we've decided, or the use of language which we've gone, it's not modern enough anymore for us to kind of get. It is a maybe not timeless kind of thing, but even though this is something sort of from the 70s, it still very much works now, and you can see how it is still being used. This kind of structure and this kind of way that language is used is still being used in sort of modern films as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that some adults don't read anymore, but all children at this age read, and they're learning to read, and they're also learning ideas, in like the general sense of ideas as a concept, or being processed in a way that we take for granted. But because you also see this in like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland.
Yes, yeah.
So what's interesting is this book. Apparently, Norton Juster hadn't read Alice in Wonderland, but they're very similar. Like, bored kid hits a world that's like absurd and illogical at times, and fights against elements of the kingdom to ultimately save it. Very broad strokes, but you can sign it. There's better parallels, but I'm not writing an essay on that. I'm just saying, like, they're very similar, but also the absurd. Like Alice in Wonderland is sort of treats the imagination in the more absurd way of like some of the stuff. It's just nonsense, but nonsense real because of Wonderland. And when Alice leaves, she just went on a journey. While like the whole point of this book is, so like actually what I skipped was, after the hang up, we see Milo at the end of the movie, and it's a montage of him walking to school and in school, and he's smiling and he's paying attention and he's laughing with his friends, and it's just a mirror of the first scene of the movie where it's just bored Milo and things are happening at him and kind of washing over. And like the whole point of this book is Milo figured out how to like appreciate school and learning, and just kind of be present, to use more modern language. And and the kingdom the absurdity of the kingdom had to do with the fact that Ryman and Reason were locked away in a castle. Because like, especially in the book, it makes it clear, but like, without numbers, Dictionopolis doesn't work. Without words, Digitopolis doesn't work. When they come back, and numbers and words can be in both kingdoms, the kingdoms sort of stop being some of the absurd parts don't work. So like Officer Short Shrift stops being everyone's guilty immediately, looking for charges, and it becomes like more like a typical idea of justice.
Yep.
Like in search of the correct version of events rather than fabricating charges. Things like that. Like it's just but yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's why though, like with Alice in Wonderland, with Disney films, with this, the Phantom Tollbooth, why these types of themes are quite common.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's all my nattering about this. I hope I've convinced. It sounds like I convinced you to at least watch it.
Yeah.
So it's because Norton Juster died last week, and I don't have a copy, so I ordered a copy. And the modern cover is the old, like the original cover of the book is a Pfeffer drawing of Milo and Talk, and the modern one has like more generic children's book cover, and it just offends me kind of because it's just like I grew up with this. I even like gave away copies, and for like years, for decades, it's had the same cover, and now it's just looks like you wouldn't pick it up off a shelf.
Right. Okay.
It's just such a boring cover. So the default Amazon cover was bleh. So I found a different bookseller which was selling it for about the same price, but obviously not next day shipping. It's fine. Boycott Amazon. Bezos is needing more money. Treat people better. Yeah. So I ordered it, but it hasn't come yet. But I'm going to read it right away. But when it's here, it'll take me like a day probably. You should drop by and pick it up if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and then maybe at some later date we can top off a podcast with did Ben enjoy it, or is it Aadil full of doo-doo?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, so hopefully I've convinced you, the viewers, to at least check out one, if not the other, or both. But also, I'm super curious from you, Ben, as well as you, the listener, if there's something similar that, like, from your childhood, it doesn't have to be a book, but like something that, like, you have a strong fondness or attachment to, that you've sort of realized over the years how much of an impact it had, whether it was formative or it's hard to tell, like chicken or egg, right?
Yes.
Did this help shape, or is it because I'm this way that I loved it? But like, if there's something you have that's similar in this sort of, I have such a strong affection and I can offer it to people as an explanation of kind of how my brain works. If you have something like that, for you, Ben, for a future episode maybe, but also viewer, would love to hear if you have those things, or whether it's a set of things,
Yes. Yeah. I think I can answer that. Not answer it now in terms of giving you a specific thing, but I think for me it is a set of things. For me, there's lots of different things, not just media. Like one that we probably won't go into would be Lego. Like Lego is absolutely formative for me in terms of leading me down sort of the path into construction and those sorts of things. So there are definitely some entertainment products that I can talk about in the future. Yeah.
Nice. I mean, I actually think as the topic producer, we should definitely do an episode on Lego.
We can do an episode. I mean, yeah.
Like sets you remember from your past, things you built, crushing defeats of Lego, and that sometimes someone comes over and takes a piece or two, or a minifig that was your favorite. Yeah, we'll definitely do an episode on Lego. I really like that. Also, just as we wrap up here, listeners, let us know about what you think about the sort of shifts in formats and whatnot. And while you're writing things down on the internet about Geek Out Weekly, you could always rate and review it on your podcast service of choice. / share it with friends, family, loved ones, person you hate but happens to have good taste in children's books. I don't know. So you can get us at podcast@outoflives.net, or you can just tweet us links, pictures of you and your favorite stuff on our Twitter at outoflivesnet. if you want to do specific Lego-based communication, reach Ben at Nova_47, myself at the Omniarch, and then also visit outoflives.net for our other podcasts and shows and VODs and articles, etc. I think that's all the things of plugging.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm tired of doing the specific plugs. I think that's just a waste of
completely. If you do want to come and chat to us more generally about entertainment, games, films, beer, books, or anything that we talked about today, then you can come and join us on our Discord as well, which at some point we're going to put out as a click a button to make it searchable. Yeah. I haven't looked at that yet.
The other thing is, if you have things that you want us to take a look at, even if it wasn't the magic thing from your youth, spoiler alert, we are going to do the Snyder Cut.
I mean, it's 4 hours, 1 minute and something 12 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, the real thing is, I don't think we quite have it in us to do the original cut first.
I didn't watch the original cut that long ago.
Oh, great! So you're going to say you don't have to.
I've seen it twice. I think I watched it when it came out, and then Kim and I found it randomly on, I don't know, some streaming service, whatever one it's currently on, because we'd watched
BVS,
Wonder Woman, the first one. So then we watched. I've never watched Batman versus Superman.
Don't.
But Kim wanted to watch it like a month or 6 weeks ago or something like that. So I had
so
seen
it is
quite
pretty
recently.
fresh.
Yeah.
Great. So now I have to rewatch it.
You don't have to.
Fair. But yeah. So I mean, obviously that's just a thing. I mean, watching the Snyder Cut is like a have-to episode, I think, for us. But yeah, it'll be interesting. But outside of Lego and the Snyder Cut and a couple other things, we'll see. We're also going to keep trying to do things like we did with narratives, the narrative week. We're just going to continue playing around with what it means to geek out on a weekly basis.
Yeah, bring some friends on and let them do that as well.
Yeah, you can stop listening to me ramble on about plot points and whatnot. But if you like that, tune in for the upcoming podcast Plot Points with Aadil. It's not going to happen. All right. Well, thanks for listening to me. I'm glad I convinced you.
Yes.
I was pretty sure it would happen. If just a few of those very silly puns, I was like, I think I've got them.
That's it. That's all it takes these days.
Hell, it's lockdown. But yeah, I've been Aadil.
I've been Ben.
Bye.
See ya.
www.outoflives.net